Cool.
All right, Molly, welcome into our show. Super grateful to have you. If you can please introduce yourself.
Yes, yeah, thank you so much for having me here. As I mentioned, really excited about this. Um, yeah, I mean, a quick intro about myself. As a person who works in the video game industry, I'm a world designer. I'm an environment artist and currently working as an art director for Lazy Lion Games. A fun, awesome little indie company that's just trucking along on our inaugural piece.
Perfect. Yeah, we actually had Leo the other day, and it was like a
Hmm.
super awesome conversation. So, glad to see like his interview was more of like the technical, like business side, and I love to
Hmm.
see like the more artistic side with you. So, super excited to have you. World designer. That sounds like a very cool title. Can you tell me a little bit more about it?
Sure. I can world designer, as its name implies, can encompass a lot of things. It's a pretty wide umbrella term, in my opinion. The way I see it, and what really excites me about world design in general, is that you just get to be part of bringing a world to life. Whether that's, it can also be just an entire concept of a video game and the visual world. It can also include the narrative side of things. Usually, narrative is always plays a part, but it can go from the macro scale of what a world might encompass to the micro of this tiny room, and you get to populate it with all these little pieces. So yeah, there's a lot to talk about within the spectrum of world design for sure.
Perfect. So would it be safe to say that like a world designer, it's kind of like it's an umbrella term for someone who like uses like narrative and lore and all like I guess kind of like the data from the game to like create the actual world with like the different factions and the different cities and like the culture and the history.
Yes, that is a great way to put it. And then all of those pieces come together. And also, of course, it depends on the size of the team. It depends on the story that you're telling and the type of game that you're working on. Some of them have just pages and pages. You can have tomes and giant books filled with details of what creates a world. And then some of them still may not get quite as detailed, but every piece, every game that you play, if we are like focusing on video games, of course, every game that you play will have its story being told, and that can be done in a lot of these different areas. I personally have focused most on the visual interpretation of those details, of the lore. How does it manifest visually, and what details can we provide in this space that tell the story in the way that it needs to be told?
That's very interesting. I feel like a lot of the times I guess as gamers, when we play a game, we really focus on like the gameplay or like the story. But I wonder if we like recognize that world building. Like there's like a team of people
Mm-hmm.
behind that, making the world feel like cohesive and livable and like realistic. So that's a very interesting job. Um, in your opinion, do you know of anyone or any team that is like great at world building?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. There are so many. I can speak to games that have delighted me, who just have brought me so much joy from running around the world that they've created. And the one that jumps immediately to my mind are quite a few Bethesda games, because they have said themselves that they have a dedicated clutter team. These are people who take all of the details, all of the props and set dressings, and all of the things that you see when you're like going over to the desk of a in a sci-fi world, and you go to the scientist's desk that you stumble upon in the room. They have the notes, and the pen, and the like the half eaten cookie or whatever it is, and the crumbs that are all over the place, and maybe some post-it notes. And they have a dedicated team of people who are sitting there going, yeah, I'm going to put this here and place that there. And that's why this scientist had this particular thing. Why did they have a half-eaten cookie? Did they just forget? Or did something happen here? Is the story being told that something happened? And now the player has the sense of like, oh, this place was left in a rush. Everything was left here suddenly. Or did they really just forget they had the rest of the cookie when they went, to deal with something in the other room? So quick answer to that, I'd say a lot of Bethesda games have some feelings that I've really enjoyed. Um, Another big one that's always been an inspiration for me, and I don't know if we're getting to that point yet, but the Cyan team, the team that made Myst and Riven, more recently Abduction, and the Firmament, are stunningly stunning games in terms of the visual storytelling. If we're focusing on that, because there's a lot of wonderful things about them. But I would say within the last couple of years, I played Abduction, Abduction with an O, and the moment my video game play like avatar's eyes opened in that world, I like my breath was taken away, and it was just there are so many things to find visually, like footsteps in the sand and something that has been left behind. And yeah, so before I know I said there's a lot of teams that could fit the bill. I'll say those two right now just leap to my mind of something that brought me a lot of joy in that way.
World building is very interesting because I feel like it definitely adds to the whole experience of the game. So you were mentioning like Bethesda, let's say like Fallout. Like for
Yes. Oh,
example,
yes. Yeah.
yeah, when you play, let's say, New Vegas, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which people say is the
One of my
best. I don't
favorites.
know. People
It
say.
is. It is my favorite
Yeah,
Fallout, but
yeah, same here, same here. But but like people, like the different lore behind the different vaults and how they came to be and the different experiments. And when you go to a vault and you see like, oh, why is this like that?
hmm
Why are they all monsters? Or how come this one is like empty? It it definitely adds to the whole experience for sure. But I feel like
hmm
as gamers, we don't really take the time to like appreciate all the work that happens behind the scenes.
Mm. I can see how it might be interpreted that way. I think one of the big lessons that I remember from studying scenic design for theater and is, and this isn't always true, but they one of the things that they uh, reminded us of often is while the audience is experiencing the show, if they notice your work in that moment where they're saying, oh, I'm thinking about the person who built this, or I'm thinking about the person who made this thing, then they've been taken out of that story a little bit, and they've been taken out of the immersion of that moment. And that's something that I've always taken with me. I never forgot that, because I'm like, oh, like how can I support the narrative? How can I build something that immerses the player even further so that they are not taken out of the moment? And so I can also see like, okay, I've spent 100 million hours in the game, and I'm like, you know what? Whoever put that cup right there, or whoever wrote that note, cool. Like that's great. But if it's kind of in those moments where they're truly immersed, then you got to be really happy about that, because they're not even thinking. They're like, I'm here. I'm thinking about these characters. I'm trying to figure this thing out. So that's what comes to mind.
I love that perspective. Yeah, that makes total sense. It's kind of like the better your design is, the less it should be noted, right? It feels like
Mm.
natural.
Yeah, I think so. And then after the fact, then of course it's always nice to hear from fans or an audience in the show or whatever it is, that they're like, "Hey, and you know what? Wow, I really love the scenic design, or I really love the lighting and how that played. Now that I'm outside of the theater, or I'm not playing the game right now, I can see how that moment really affected me, or why I was so engaged. Or I just really loved how it looked. It made me feel." Um, And so I know for myself, there's a lot of times in games where I'm just in awe and feeling so the I have the chills and I'm just my heart is racing and I can't even if I tried to pinpoint what it was, it's because the developers have brought all of these elements so well together that I'm just like I don't know what it is, but I love it. I'm enjoying myself so much.
Exactly. I love that. We're having this amazing conversation, but I also think it's important to, humanize the guest. I also want to hear about how you became a game lover, how you started it, your career in the gaming industry, what motivates you to work in the gaming industry. So if we could rewind just a little bit, just go
All right,
back in time
yes.
and
Backpedaling.
have your origin story. Let's start from there.
Okay. Oh, yeah. So to arrive at the where we are now, um, the focus on games. So I mentioned already that one of the first times I saw video games was just my dad messing around with Myst. But I think that also really speaks to my eventual journey into the arts. I went to school for theater and I studied both acting and scenic design at the same time. But I also grew up with a lot of film. We were really fortunate to have uh, just we were regularly watching all kinds of movies in the house. We had another big one for me and my family is Star Trek, which has an extensive lore for fans of the show. There you go, live long and prosper, my friend. And I think having those rich experiences of seeing different ways that stories can be told was so special. And so whether it was acting or whether it was designing set pieces, building different pieces for a show, they always had this narrative through line. The story that was being told was always at the core of it, of course. And simultaneously, my first video game console was the Nintendo 64. And I was just hooked. Immediately, I think Super Mario 64 was the first game I actually played on
Oh,
that console. COVID, because that is when it happened.
okay.
I was working in the theater, and I was working on building two shows, so scenic design for a couple of shows, and then of course, most of the world was affected by COVID and everything shut down. And I was just trying to think, like many people, how can I move forward if this is the new reality of the world? And so I tried something I'd always been curious about, which is programming.
Ooh,
And I know you're a software engineer,
correct.
so that is something I attempted, and I found out that it wasn't my strong suit, which is okay. And I think it's really important to find those things that are not our wheelhouse. So then And but from there, I thought, okay, I'm at a certain stage of my life. I'm going to take a leap, and I'm going to invest in combining my skills in the way that I believe I can make it happen. And I studied game development in a 6-month course, and there it was mostly programming related, and so I learned a lot about the technical side of developing video games, and combined that with the artistic side of 3D. I started learning 3D modeling, and I found this endless world of possibilities in 3D modeling because it's like construction in the real world, but you're not bound by Earth's laws of gravity and physics and materials. So you can make
Exactly.
anything you want. And I think that seeing that combination of the technical side and the art solidified for me, like, oh, this is how I can have a voice here. And then that is how it brought me to where I am now.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you found a way to combine your artistic abilities with technology, and now you're creating awesome things. I love
Yeah,
that.
because I saw once I was researching a lot, and this is ended up for me being a really important part of just trying to understand all the different aspects and all the different hats of game development. Because I think that's before I didn't quite understand that there's so many ways now that you can be a game developer. And I saw that because something that really broke my heart was trying to get into tech or trying to get into a new field, because I couldn't do art and scenic design or couldn't do theater and film at the time. I thought, oh, it would be really tough to not be able to do those things that I studied for so long and had, started my career was in that field. And I was able to realize that there were places in game development that were scenic design just digitally. So I was doing world building for years. That was what I was doing. I just didn't have that terminology for it. And so when
Exactly.
I made that one to one where I could say, oh, this is something actually that this is my wheelhouse. This is something I've been doing for a while. I started to see that a lot of those skills were transferable in very real ways. And I've seen a lot of young people or people of all ages can feel like, oh, but I would have to learn something completely different. And I'd like to encourage people to, you hear it a lot, like, see what your transferable skills are. But it's true. It's absolutely possible that something you've been doing for a long time, and if it's something that you've enjoyed for a long time, might realistically have a place that can be adapted to be something within this industry, if that's what you'd like to do.
100%. I love that perspective, and I really love the fact that you know how to like repurpose previous experience.
Mm,
That doesn't necessarily have to do with like tech or games, but you repurpose it in a way that you can bring a different how do you say, like a more unique value proposition to games.
mm,
And I feel like a lot of
yeah.
times we tend to like, oh, I only work in like a restaurant as a server. I don't know a lot about
Mm.
like, I don't know, UX design. And you're like, maybe, but you know how to treat customers, you know how to talk to customers. Maybe that can help you in like UX research, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the problem solving involved for sure. And I'll just shout out to all customer service workers forever. They deserve they deserve the world.
They
Um,
do.
yeah, absolutely agree. I think that it's a really there's so many ways that it can be, um, like you said, repurposed.
I love that. And I can definitely see I like how your career, even though you started in a different field, it has a very natural transition to
Mm,
what you do now, which I think it's awesome. Um, but you studied UX and a lot of things. How
mm.
come you decided to like focus on games specifically? What is it about games specifically that caught your attention? You're like, you know what? I want to have a voice here and I want to provide this experience for other people. What is it about
Hmm.
games specifically? It's
From
a
a
good question, huh?
personal, it's a very good question. Yes, you are full of very good questions. I think of what I know what starts as a personal reason expands into why I want to be part of something that does this for other people. Um, Video games, there have been many games over the course of my life that I've played that have genuinely lifted me up, that have genuinely made me feel like a hero, that have genuinely taken me to a place where I thought, you know what? I'm going to keep trying at life. And to candidly, that's something that I know a lot of people struggle with, and that's why video games have been so critically important for so many people. And it doesn't have to be some monumental game with such a powerful storyline. It can be something deeply, just deeply comforting. Or it can be many hundreds and thousands of people have many hundreds and thousands of reasons. But that is a big part of those personal reasons why, or those moments in my life where I was like, you know what? Playing this game, playing this character, and going on this journey actually makes me feel like I can do stuff in the real world, that I'm capable of being a hero or being better or trying my best at a situation. And I love that. I love that games are this combination of storytelling where you get to play a role. So you're part of the movie and you're part of the story. And it's just that kind of gets at the biggest reason why I loved UX, and I take a lot of lessons from what I learned being a UX researcher. And of course, that's a big part of game development as well. But what moved me to the world building side was that I wanted to be part of building those places for people to go into and feel, just go on a journey, and immerse themselves. And obviously, of course, the worlds that is a video game. You immerse yourself into another world.
Exactly. That's a well, first I wanted to thank you. That's a very powerful answer and very human.
Mm.
It's such a positive take on video games, right? Which I really appreciate. Kind of like reframing games as self-development, right?
Mm.
Kind of like,
Yeah.
oh, I played this game. I did this in the video game. Why not in real life? Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting because I do come from a more traditional society
Mm.
where video games are seen as pure escapism.
Mm. Sure.
Which there's definitely valid reasons for that. Um, what would you say to counter that argument? Like, games are not only escapism, right? There's true value. There's for
Mm-hmm.
self-development or something you can improve in your real life. I'm very curious about what you think.
That's another great question. I feel like I'm going to say that about all of your questions. Yeah, seen the discussions many times around not quite understanding why a video game or an experience is so important to someone. And there's definitely sides to it, which I can agree that there's certain times where it's like, okay, maybe there's something else we can do with our time. But what's difficult about that is that it's very, very, very subjective. Um, and it depends on the person. And I suppose my first thought would be to ask the individual, why is playing this game so important to you? Um, what does it do for you? Because I definitely there's many genres that for me I'm like I can see the appeal. It's not for me personally, and I could see that someone I definitely had conversations with people who feel that way about the games that I love. So um, it's a tough one because it is very personal. But I would say that a lot of people do want to see themselves or see a version of themselves in the media that they just all types of media. But I think video games are special because like we were talking about before, they allow us to step into the role, and they allow us to have some feeling of adventure and what are the choices I'm going to make here. And then I think it becomes an individual's journey of how they then grow. from each of these different points onward in their lives. That's a complicated one. Yeah, yeah, it's very
Yeah, no,
interesting.
no, that's a great question. Sorry, a great answer, and I agree. A lot of your experience with the game is quite subjective, right? It's difficult
Hmm.
to pinpoint. So I completely see what you're saying.
I'll
Awesome.
also,
Go ahead.
real quick,
Yeah,
I just think I wanted my quick off the cuff answer to someone who says it's pure escapism would just be one, do you not consume any kind of storytelling? Because you could, if you want to use that argument, you could say, okay, then any kind of storytelling is escapism, has the potential to be escapism. Movies, TV, uh, books. I don't make that argument. I love storytelling,
sure.
and I think that there are definitely healthy doses of a little bit of escapism, and like we just have been talking about, it's a balance. It's a balance for the individual.
Exactly. I also, yes, completely agree with you. And there's also like a generational thing, right? Maybe
Mm,
for us, we grew up with video games, and for us, it's like a very like it's a very precious thing. Maybe for previous
yeah,
generations, maybe it's a bit more difficult to relate, and it's completely understandable. Maybe it's difficult for us to relate to what they like.
yeah, I agree. And oh yeah, I mean, we could go down a rabbit hole of stories, interactions with my grandmother, just being like, what is happening on that little device? What is happening? Um, but uh, yeah, and I imagine there will be things that I am like, huh, that is an interesting new thing that's happening. Um, and I hope to be able to remember my own little self who was like, it's a video game, it's a story. I'm, a Pokemon trainer,
Right.
obviously. And this is something that I'm really, really invested in.
Exactly. I love that. Awesome. So, I wanted to also talk about your projects as well. So something
Sure.
that completely like, that I really, really liked because I'm also someone who likes learning languages was
Mm,
your contribution to core meta. Um,
yes.
yeah, so if you could explain a little bit what core is, what your contribution was, yeah, I would love to talk about that.
Absolutely.
And also, if you want
Um,
to like share your screen or do something like that, please go ahead.
yeah, I'm trying to think what the best way might be to. So, um, a high level look at core. So,
Hmm.
Core Meta is the language learning company of my dear friend Miji Lee. She is a language learning instructor. Well, she is a languages instructor, and herself Korean. And so she, through, I won't speak too much about her personal journey, but she saw an opportunity utilizing extended reality, in our case, VR, to teach languages. And then that's where I joined up with her after she had concepted the idea of core meta, which is essentially this world of that you can explore and play various different games while learning Korean at the same time.
You did like the role of like the artist and the
Mm-hmm.
architect. Like there's so many roles that you play while doing visual design. It's like it's amazing. I love that. So basically,
Thank you.
what you did, and correct me if I'm wrong. So
Mm-hmm.
first you have a concept, then you gather as much data as possible. So you have
Mm-hmm.
like the picture of like the houses, the picture of like how they're built, the materials, gather as much data as possible, do your
Mm-hmm.
research, then you do like a draft. Like I see you have like an overview, kind of like architectural drawing.
Mm-hmm.
After that,
Yes.
you have like a 3D design of the houses, and on top of that, then you add like the lightning and like kind of like the storytelling aspect of how the light influences like the mood, blah blah blah, and then you have a finished product. Is that uh, kind of how it is?
Yeah. I also want to check. I know we're at the hour. Do you have time to keep chatting? You have to go. Okay, cool.
Right.
Um, Now I'm thinking about it now, and it might be so the concept of the whole world. So in this particular case, like the whole Hanok and things that that exist within it, is sort of pretty immense. If you have time, we could also go through kind of like a similar process, but just for that tree that you mentioned earlier, and
Let's
that
do
might
it.
be a more concise way to talk about the different aspects of it.
Let's do it. Sounds good.
In the world of core meta, in a traditional Hanok home that we've created using a combination of both past and future. So it's not quite the exact representation of historical Hanok, but it fuses the future and the past together and wants to we want to move forward and step forward into the future, and kind of bringing together VR in the past and all these things. So since we're working with so many new things in the XR world, but one of a piece within that world that I just really got to go all in on and spend a lot of time focusing on was the a loud motorcycle.
You're good. No worries.
Okay, we live right on a curve, so there's a multiple part process of them passing.
No
Um,
worries.
yeah, one of the things I got to focus a lot on was a hero piece, which is a monument piece within the world. Um, Maybe often might be a significant point of interest in a level, or might be the centerpiece of an area. In our case, it is the centerpiece, and it is a magnificent ginkgo tree. It is, for those if you're not familiar with the ginkgo, it is a very majestic. It's a majestic tree. It's also called the maidenhair tree because it has these beautiful fan-shaped leaves that have very fine lines running along the leaf itself. It is gorgeous. It's a beautiful green, and then it transforms into this golden fire yellow that is just it's incredible. Um, and so we wanted this centerpiece of the home in our virtual Hanok would be a place where players could maybe have a moment to relax. A part of developing for VR is keeping in consideration that worlds can be very restrictive sometimes. And so if you have the opportunity to open up a space, um, it's great to take it because the player might need a moment of respite if they need a moment to sort of virtually breathe where they can look up and see sky.
Right.
It can help that feeling pass. So we decided to put this ginkgo in the center, and it is an incredible tree. And so part of the first part of the process is, of course, the research. And what I spend a lot of time doing is collecting as many different pictures and angles and versions of the ginkgo that I could find. Another really fun part of that, and a part of my work of world building that I really enjoy is the flora aspect. So the biome that you would exist in. Not
Right.
mostly that includes animals, of course, and every other part of rocks and the ground and all that. But creating trees in Speed Tree is something I just really have a lot of fun doing. And part of that fun is the research itself. So we get to find out that the ginkgo tree has virtually remained unchanged for the last 200 million years. It's a living fossil in
Oh,
our world.
really?
Yeah, it's incredible.
What?
And it's essentially the only one of its kind. So I have a link here to Peter Crane. He's a botanist from Yale, I believe. He wrote
Hmm.
a book about the ginkgo tree and discusses just how absolutely incredible this tree is. And that they have evidence of it, fossils of it from China and different parts of the world where there may be minor differences, but compared to other trees that have evolved in the way that they have, the ginkgo is essentially the same as it was when dinosaurs were treading the earth.
That is
Um,
insane.
isn't that wild?
That is
um,
wild.
yeah. So you're standing next to a ginkgo and you're like, okay, wow, this thing is a dinosaur essentially, and so I also really felt that while it's symbolism that already exists for the ginkgo, which is a duality of nature and sort of that it it's known for its resilience and for its longevity. I think it just speaks also to what we were trying to do with core, fusing the fusion of the past and the present. And the ginkgo is also known for its perfumed fruit. I don't know that everybody would use the word perfume to describe it. Actually, most people say it smells like vomit, so it's really bad. Has a really bad pungent smell.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Interesting.
And so it's,
Didn't
I
know that.
love that this beautiful tree is also like, I'm, I have this horrible stink. Um,
Interesting.
and so yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff you should go into with the ginkgo. But part of the joy of researching for world building is that you find out all this stuff. You're like, oh, this is incredible. Um,
Exactly.
from the research phase, so here are just an example of all the pictures that I was able to find. Thank you to all the people who share their pictures of ginkgo trees. And the next step after research is the planning and ideation phase. So if I could encompass the phases of my development, it would be the research, the prototype, which is planning and ideation, and then you would test that within the engine for both its visual aspect and its technical aspect. And if you need to ideate again, so it's what we hear all the time, ideate often, and then implementation. And often after implementation, there's still like, okay, we could fix something here. But so research, prototype, planning and ideation, testing, and then implementation into the project as its final aspect. And so during the ideation phase, for an asset like this, but also for other parts of world building, I typically will do sketches. So I'll play around with all the different information that I found and working on different aspects of the details of something. And in this case, how do the branches connect how do the leaves connect to the branches, and how do the branches connect to the trunk, and how does the whole tree work? Where do the fruits connect, and at what point in its life cycle do these things happen? And so here's some more sketches about what something's really important in world building is finding the shape of something, because a lot of times in video games, players are going to be seeing something from very far away, or maybe they are just working with different level of eyesight, whatever it is. Developing the shape of something really helps get the idea across. And then if you need to, you can add a bunch of different details to that. But seeing a shape is vitally important, particularly when you're building a cohesive world. Excuse me. Here's some silhouette work. Silhouette work I just really enjoy because it's a free-form exercise that lets you just explore different ways you might want to present this particular object in the world. And from there, here's some more explorations of how the tree fits together. And how something fits together is, I think you'll find across most asset creation that it's something everyone has to consider in terms of on the technical side. In this particular project, we used a lot of modular building because it then helps also within Unity's engine. We're using Unity for this game. It helps in how you then implement all the pieces and how that works within the engine. So we chose to go with a modular setup because I had a lot of really repeating pieces in the architecture, for example. Like there were a lot of wooden beams, a lot of the walls ended up being similar. There were assets that were repeated many times. So being able to use only have the engine draw something a few times helps with performance and memory.
The level of detail, especially with the branches, like on the previous image, that is in the best meaning, insane how
Oh, thanks.
like you have like the directions the branches go and just that's wow. That level of detail
Thank
is
you.
amazing. That's
I want to get inside the tree, and if I can get inside the tree and be the tree, then
you
I
want to
can
be the
maybe make
tree, that's right.
make the tree. Yeah. It's more silhouette work, just a lot of playing
Okay.
around. Yeah. Um, this is just more technical aspects
Hmm.
that you consider levels of detail and whether or not something has to be super detailed or is the player ever going to actually see that. So those are things you can take into consideration. Um, and optimization is important for most every system, but particularly for untethered VR, it's something that we think about a lot. Um, and so, yeah, then they finally arrive at implementation. And this is after a lot of testing to make sure that it met certain poly count requirements and performance benchmarks. Um,
Right.
and yeah, and then you get in and you enjoy. You get into the game and you enjoy.
Exactly. It's interesting because it's not only like a language learning experience, right? It's a whole
Mm-hmm.
immersive experience where you can learn about not only the language but the culture and the architecture
Mm-hmm.
and the fauna and it's just the trees, the flora, sorry. That is the I
Oh yeah, that's all
that's
the same.
that's amazing. That's amazing. I wish they had something like that with Japanese. I would love to try something like that.
Well, I think that you will be pleasantly surprised in the future. Um,
Ooh, okay, okay,
yeah, I think
okay,
it's on its
okay.
way.
So I wanted to ask you, so let's say you have someone who comes to you and they're like, Molly, I love your work. I love what you're doing. I want to be a world designer like yourself, but
Mm,
I don't have any experience. And, I'm a little bit demoralized because there's a lot of layoffs going on in the gaming industry. What
yeah,
should I do?
I would say I know for myself, what has helped me the most in the past in those situations is that I just didn't, I felt like I was not moving forward at all in any direction. Maybe you're waiting around to hear from an application that you sent in, or you feeling like you can't find something that suits you, or you're just spinning your wheels and you're spinning your wheels and you're not moving anywhere. What helped me was to go back to what I loved. And so I would create things, I would make things. I would go back to a game that inspired me and I would try to think, okay, um, maybe with this particular level, how might I do something? How might I interpret this in a different way and try something new? Um, and I will say I do understand like when you're in that mindset, it's hard to have the energy to do stuff like that. So I understand that can be difficult. Um, but even if it's like 15 minutes a day of sketching out an idea or thinking about how you might do something differently, do it. Please create something. Just stay creating, stay exploring new things. Um, because it can feel like you're going nowhere. And so my biggest thing would be to keep creating and put it out there. Start a little blog. Just put your ideas out on the table, out into the world. And and then at the end of that, while you are still applying to things or while you are waiting, you've been building a little base of something that you have been sharing with the world. And it doesn't have to be like a big social media presence or anything like that, because that always made me anxious. I was like, oh, I don't know how to do those things. Just, oh, I know it's interesting for an actor to say, but I just little pieces here and there just kept me in touch with that side of myself. Um, And at the same time, I was honing those skills. I was building those reserves for. I was staying on top of the skills. And so when the moment did arrive, and it felt for a very long time that it wasn't going to. When the moment did arrive, I had something to share, and I could show examples of that work. And the other big thing, and as I know we hear it a lot, and as an anxious person, it's always like, oh, networking, why? Oh, I don't know about that. It does, it can make a very big difference. The people that surround us in the community are invaluable, and if you find the time to just, and it doesn't, if like cold writing to someone or reaching out to someone is just feels like too much right now, I would say just comment on things that you find interesting. Just put your voice out there, be engaged in the conversation. I would say are the two biggest things to just keep doing if you're feeling stuck or feeling down about that right now.
Exactly. Awesome. I think you summarized it perfectly. So basically, you have to be on top of your hard skills, right? So let's say
Hmm.
if you code your language, your coding languages. If you're an artist, be on top of your art, and then your soft skills, right? Like to network, talk to people, reach out, create those connections.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Um, I think also in just the nature of creating things and making little games or little scenes, even especially if you want to be if you're interested in world design, try not to feel overwhelmed by the pressure to create an entire world.
Mm,
If you're like, whoa, I don't even know where to start with something like that, make something very small. Make something very tiny. Make the coziest little desk. Or like if you just want to work on a notebook asset, like just create a world on the page of a notebook. Like just think, whose notebook is this? What are they working on? Did they scribble some notes to themselves? Was there a coffee ring? Like take the who, what, where, when, why, and how. Yeah, that's all of them. And build a small narrative for something you see on your desk. It doesn't have to be an entire world. It can. So yeah, try. That would be another big piece of advice, because I know I felt that way too. I was like, oh, I haven't created an entire cityscape, but you don't have to. You can start very small, and then who knows? Like those items can build up, and then you can create a slightly bigger tableau, a slightly bigger piece, and then that can continue getting bigger and bigger. So don't let the oh, I don't have an entire giant project stop you from making something and putting that out there.
exactly.
Because
Just make
a
something, right?
story,
Hmm.
yeah, because an entire story can be told with you know, I don't know, the mouse. Like maybe the mouse is I'm holding up a computer mouse for the audio people.
Yes.
Um, the mouse can be have scratches on it or be grimy, or maybe you're showing the bottom and it's got some like I don't know thing growing on it, or some like piece of tape is stuck there. It doesn't, and that already starts telling a whole story. So um, yeah, starting small is very much okay. There's a lot you can tell with just one small thing.
Exactly. I love that. The whole like building blocks to make something bigger. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Molly.
Yeah.
Perfect, perfect. So let's say people want to contact you, they want to get to know
Mm-hmm.
they want to maybe ask you to like work on their project, they want to see your portfolio. Where can people find you? What's the best place to find you, to contact you?
Um, Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on there. I'm just, like in terms of active, I check my messages and things like that. So I'd love to connect there if that's what someone prefers. And otherwise, if you'd like to read about some of the case studies that I've written for my visual design, they can find me on Substack as Space Mollusk. So it's SPACEMOLLUSK. That's where I share a lot of just like design breakdowns and just the thought process behind my work. And otherwise, with the same username on Instagram, somehow I share more about just like life in general there, but it often has a lot of the inspirations for the design work that I do as well.
Perfect. And yeah, guys, please contact Molly. She was super kind and super awesome, very responsive. She's always willing to like help. So please, if you need to contact her for like a project or whatever, she's very, very helpful. So please talk to Molly, 100%.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
All
I love
right.
that.
Yeah, so this is the end of the show. Molly, any final thoughts before we finish? Anything else?
Like your favorite hero in any video game, keep fighting. You'll get there. I believe it.
I love that. We're going back to the whole games as self-development. As your
Yes,
hero, you can go ahead and
that's
fight.
my.
You can do it. Perfect. All right, Molly. Thank you so much. That was perfect.
Yeah, and thank you. I really, really just enjoyed this and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.